Let's grab our Bibles, turn to Genesis 30. Genesis 30. We are working our way, still working our way through the book of Genesis, and we are in the life of Jacob. And I'm just going to let you know, this is a bizarre text. Okay? All Scripture is given by the inspiration of God. It is God-breathed, so really it's expiration rather than inspiration. And so all of it points to Christ. It has its ultimate fulfillment in Christ. That doesn't mean there aren't passages that are just weird. We are reading an ancient book that should be understood in its original context, but we are not an ancient people. We are a postmodern people. And so bridging those gaps can at times be difficult. So I'll be lying if I said I had it all figured out, because I don't. So why don't we take it in two parts? We'll start in verse 25. And we'll go down probably to verse 36. Moses writes, "As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, 'Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go for you know the service that I have given you.' But Laban said to him, 'If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it.' Jacob said to him, 'You yourself know how I have served you, how your livestock have fared with me, for you had little before I came. It has increased abundantly. The Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now when shall I provide for my own household also?' He said, 'What shall I give you?' Jacob said, 'You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep, and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later. When you come to look into my wages with you, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen.' Laban said, 'Good, let it be as you have said.' But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in the charge of his sons. He set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob passed through the rest of Laban's flock." So, what does that have to do with the price of bread in China, right? How does that meet the needs of the single mom? Those are always the questions we ask. Well, a couple things to note here. One, this passage needs to be read in light of everything we've seen since the end of chapter 29. So, again, the chapters aren't always perfect the way they're laid out. If you go back to when Jacob gets married and his wives start to have children and the mess that is. So if you go to the end of chapter 29 all the way down to the end of chapter 30, you really have one literary unit. And we have to see them in light of that. Because if you just isolate this story from all the other stuff, it's just a weird story. Why do I care about a shepherd raising spotted and speckled sheep and goats, right? It is a bit odd. However, when we see it in the context, it does make sense. So remember that Jacob is the grandson of Abraham, and those promises given to Abraham are now given to Jacob. And so just as God blessed Abraham and Isaac through both children and wealth, so too God is going to do the same to Jacob. And so those two areas are emphasized in the patriarchal studies. One is they are given children. Abraham given initially 2, and then, of course, Isaac with his 2. And Jacob's going to have, right now he has 12. Benjamin hasn't been born, but you have Dinah. So 12 kids. And so you have the exponential growth of children. He really is fruitful and multiplying. But among the patriarchs, they are blessed financially. They really prosper. Not because, as the prosperity heretics will want us to believe, not because God wants us rich, but rather in Genesis, it is a reminder that God creates gardens where there is wilderness. And so you remember the story of Isaac, that God told Isaac, "Don't go down to Egypt, I'll bless you in the middle of the famine." And that's what God did. So too, he's going to do the same thing with Jacob. He's going to bless him financially and enlarge his space, his influence and wealth and his power, even though he's in circumstances that might prevent that from happening. So it's not about money, it's about God doing the impossible. Right? So let's start with the bargain here in verse 25 to 36. I may have to push a button. Don's not here. Let me go push that button real quick. Or we'll have to skip that. We've got to spoil it, Don. Yep, there it is. All right, there you go. So the bargain. It starts out here in verse 25, I think it is, that Jacob, he's had Joseph, right? And then he goes to Laban saying, I've worked for you now for 14 years. One of the misconceptions of the story of Jacob, I've been guilty of this, is to think, well, he worked 7 years for the first wife, and then he had to work another 7 years for the second wife. And so what you had was a 7-year gap between the two wives. That's not how it worked. And so he didn't work 14 years just to get Rachel. He worked 7 years in a week. And he got Rachel, but he had to pay her off by working for 7 years, right? Remember what we said when we look back is that men want one thing. They want the girl, right? And there is no price too high if it means he gets the girl. So he essentially worked 14 years for the one girl he wanted. The problem is he was tricked, he was deceived, and he has two wives. So for the last 7 years, he has had these 12 kids. Can you imagine? 12 kids in 7 years. I'm just going to let you meditate on that for a minute. Let me tell you, can you imagine how many vans they went through, right? You know, they first got the minivan, to get, the 5 kids, and then before you know it, they get the kidnapper bus, like the Vaults have, I've always teased them about. All right, and then that's not big enough, so they have to go get a school bus, some used school bus, and but nevertheless, so it's been 14 years, and his relationship with Laban is a type of indentured servant. So he isn't just an employee working for his father-in-law's business. He is closer to being a slave than an employee. So he essentially has a contract of 14 years, and that contract is coming to an end. And his payment for what it is he wanted is concluding. But this creates a problem, is that he has his children while he is like an indentured servant. And that creates a lot of problems. So what you get then is that in the ancient Near Eastern world, his children would be Laban's, not Jacob's. And so the formula he uses is quite interesting. He'll say, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. That is a formulaic language. You see similar language. Let me depart that I may go to my own country. That seems to be like a type of formula, like he's coming up with a new contract, right? He's met this contract. Now let's enter into another agreement. I get to go back home. I've given you my allotted time. Now it's time for me to move on. And that's what he wants here. I want you to notice that he repeats himself, my own home, my own country. Those are two of the same, saying the same thing twice, but it is for emphasis. So notice verse 26. It says, give me my wives and my children. Strange, isn't it? Remember, in the ancient Near Eastern world, this relationship is by law and by agreement. Those children are essentially Laban's. Because you remember that when Hagar gives birth to Ishmael, Ishmael is technically, in the eyes of the law, ancient Near Eastern customs, it's Abraham and Sarah's, not Hagar's. This would have been a common approach. And so Jacob is like an indentured servant. And so in order for him to get his kids, he has to get special permission from the landowner. And that is what he is requesting here. By the way, we find this reference elsewhere in the Bible. In Exodus 21, if his master gives him a wife and she bears him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, he shall go out alone. Now, I don't know the context of all this right after the Ten Commandments, so there is a context there. I just to sort of put it, that this would have been common law in the ancient Near Eastern world. Bizarre to us, yes, but would not have been bizarre back then. So what you have is the master who gives his own daughters to one of his servants. And by law, those children become his, not the biological father's. Again, it's odd to us, would have been more common. And you can kind of wonder what's going through Jacob's mind. Will Laban agree to this? He obviously wants his kids, but Laban is a very greedy man. We've seen this already, that when Laban first met Abraham's servant, who gets Rebekah to marry Isaac, right? That the servant is loaded with money, and Laban couldn't care less about his sister. He just wants the money. And now we see that he has used his 2 daughters to entice Jacob to stick around, not for 7 years, but for 14. And so you do wonder, is he going to be willing to give up his own kids? Because if he keeps the kids, maybe he'll get to keep Jacob. The man is greedy, so you do wonder. And to be clear, Laban does see the kids as his children, at least in the eyes of law. So you see, the daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. So the greedy person is one who loves to use the word mine. He is certainly part of that. So in verse 27-28, he says, look, I really want you to stay because I'm benefiting from you. So he says, I've learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Now, before we look at the divination stuff, which really sticks out to the modern reader, remember, the promise given to Abraham is, through you, Abraham, your descendants, the nations will be blessed. And we're seeing that here. Through Jacob, Laban is blessed. And Jacob will later say, well, before I got here, you were a nobody. But because of God's blessing upon me, you've been blessed. And that is still the view of Christianity, isn't it? That wherever you have Christianity take root, people's lives are better. That even those who don't embrace Christianity, their lives are better. There is a functional Christianity that we've enjoyed as a country, that not so much now, to where people, husbands stayed home and raised children, even though they didn't believe a word of the Bible. But because of that sort of culture created by Christianity, children's lives were better for it. Society was better for it. Crime was down, that sort of stuff. Right? And so we still believe this. So Jacob, by virtue of the blessing God has upon him, he blesses everyone around him. And so he realizes that. Now, he wants to raise his wages, right? It's a good thing, right? Basically, Jacob has worked for one thing. He wants the girl, right? That's been his payment. Now, it's worth it, right? I mean, you'd be, every guy here, we would work another 7 years to keep the girl that we got, right? There's a comedian who does this bit. My wife and I love this guy's stand-up. He says, he was talking about the movie that DiCaprio, is that the Titanic guy? Okay, that guy. He did a movie where he got eaten by a bear or something. I don't know, he won a bunch of awards, right? You probably know what movie I'm talking about. I've not seen it. But he got all those awards for it. And he said, a friend of mine says, man, a good thing he really deserved that. He worked for 9 months. He had to go out there in the cold, had to wrestle with bears and all that sort of stuff. And the guy's response was, really? I think you're underestimating what I would do for $30 million, right? He said, DiCaprio had to lose 30 pounds for that role. He's like, I would get down to 30 pounds, right, for $30 million, right? I mean he's got a point, right? And so he's done all this work just to marry Rachel, and now he's being offered a pay raise. And Jacob's initial response is that you can't pay me enough, because home is where I'm called to be. And we're going to make a big deal of that later. Now, Laban mentions divination. I've learned by divination that Yahweh is the source behind these blessings. Now, what you have here is an example of syncretism. We've already seen this in one place, that Laban is one who will say whatever is necessary to get what he wants. And so when Abraham's servant shows up initially for several chapters ago looking for a wife for Isaac, Laban plays the game. But we know in the background he's not a believer. So here he talks about Yahweh has blessed you and thus blessed me. But because of his ignorance of the religion of Jacob, he assumes, well, like all the other religions, you practice divination. And by the way, divination does show up later in Genesis 44, verse 5 and 15. That divination is used. This would have been common in ancient Near Eastern world. All the religions would have done this. They would have had priests and seers and everything else that you would have gone to know why this has happened and what should you do here and there, right? This has been very common. So whatever the means of divination was, he uses it. And even through that, he realizes the God of Jacob, Yahweh is his name, is blessing him. And so he's a businessman. He knows that if something is working, don't change it. And so he wants to keep Jacob. But this is ultimately Laban's effort at deceiving Jacob. I'll give you a pay raise if you stay with me, because Laban knows he is blessed beyond measure. And so even though he will have to pay Jacob more, he will benefit even more from it. Right? So, I think this is an interesting point. Laban is shrewd in that he sees that Jacob is successful. He wants to benefit from that success, that blessing. You remember when Isaac was in Gerar, and they every time he dug a hole, he found water, and he put a well in. You remember what the Gerarites did was, out of envy and jealousy, they would fill up the wells with dirt, and that makes no sense whatsoever. It makes no sense whatsoever. Because in the famine, if anyone finds water, that's going to benefit you because you can't find water. So instead of benefiting from the blessings of Isaac, they compromised that blessing. Laban is shrewd enough that he wants to benefit from the blessings of Jacob. I got to at least give him that. So he goes on, verse 29. Jacob essentially ignores the offer for a pay raise, right? He said to him, "You yourself know that I've served you, how your livestock have fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it increased, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. But now, give me what is mine. Give me my household. I want to go home." Right? My parents haven't met the grandkids yet. I want to go home. Jacob completely ignores the offer for the pay raise. And Jacob admits, the reason you've been blessed is because God has chosen to bless me. Now, I've given you 14 years. I want to go on. However, starting in verse 31, Jacob says, there is one thing that will get me to stay. And this is where it gets weird. There's one thing. I tell you what. I'll keep shepherding your flocks if you let me keep the rarest of the flock. Not much of a bargain, is it? It's not at all. Imagine you're working for a boss, and you've made him all this money. You say, I'll tell you what, I'll stay. You don't even have to give me a pay raise. Give me the one in a million customer. Right? I don't know. It's not a good one-to-one. But the chances of increasing your flock this way is bizarre. Because the striped and the speckled and spotted sheep are rare, and the black lambs are rare. Same thing with the goats. They're rare. So he doesn't say, I tell you what, you keep the spotted and speckled, because, hey, you said I can have a pay raise. This is my pay raise. He doesn't say that. So he presumably gives Laban the majority of the flock. He'll take the minority in the flock. And I think what Jacob is doing, he's going to prove a point. God's blessing is to me. You're the beneficiary of it. So what I'll do is I'll take the rarest, as a type of genetic sort of thing, I'll take the rarest, and God will bless me through them, and I'll give you the majority, sheep and goat, and we'll see who really has the blessing of God. All right. I think that's what he's doing. And so, when Laban hears this, he knows a good deal when he hears it, right? He's like, okay, so I don't have to pay you more, and I get to give you the scraps. That sounds like a good deal. It's a good deal, right? His bottom line has not lost anything. Jacob will now have some property of his own, right? And remember, I think, again, Jacob he's going to prove a point. Also, he needs his own flock to take back to Canaan. And so he'll say, okay, I'll take the rarest flock you have. So I'll start out with 2 or whatever it is. And from there, I'm going to be blessed, and then I can go home. And what I have is real property. I'm not starting from scratch on a farm in Canaan. I have real property here. So Laban is just as excited as could be, and give Jacob some credit. He too is shrewd. He's leaning in that Laban is greedy. So what we're seeing is a long con. Jacob is the deceiver who got deceived by Laban, which means white. Oh, by the way, a play on words. Jacob tells Laban, which means white, you keep the white sheep. And all this is a big con. It's a deception. Because later he will get his spotted and speckled sheep and he is going to run away. And he's got all this property of Laban, and Laban loses all this money as a result. So it's a play on words with white. We looked at that when we first met Laban months ago. Notice in 34, Laban doesn't even barter. He said, good. Let it be as you said. Hasn't even tried to barter. Right? He's like, I better sign the dotted line before you change your mind, sort of thing. Right? And so what Laban then does is to make the deal even sweeter for himself. He goes a 3 days journey away, which is an ancient way of saying a long, far away, right? They're really far away, and Jacob cannot know what it is that they're doing. They're so far away. He can't do anything to change it. So he then separates the spotted and speckled sheep and goats and the black lambs with the white lambs. Okay, and the reason he's doing that is he does not want them to breed, and so he's going to give Jacob the rare ones. There's not very many of them likely, and he says, okay, they're your problems. And genetically, that doesn't mean that they're all going to produce spotted and speckled sheep. That's a genetic thing. Much in the same way, if you have two red-headed parents, that doesn't mean their kid is going to be red-headed. Might be. There's a chance of it. But that's not exactly how it always works. I'm sure if your mother and father have blue eyes, one of your siblings doesn't. And people made jokes, right? You must be the adopted one. Probably you made that joke. You're growing up. You're the adopted kid, whatever it might be. And so Laban is decreasing the chances that the spotted and speckled animals will produce. So we go from the bargain to the barn. I was not going to be that creative with these names, so forgive me. So here it gets weirder, okay? So if you're still with me with the spotted and speckled, it's only going to get more bizarre, okay? What we get here is that Jacob does, he goes into an old wives' tale, if you will. That's probably a sexist term. You can't use that anymore. But I think you know what I'm talking about. There's something that was believed that makes no sense, but it's believed, and everyone has stories to prove that it works. But we know better now. So go down to verse 37. Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks, the Laban of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places, where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred where they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Now, when my wife was pregnant with our firstborn, we knew nothing about anything. My wife knew a little bit about very little, okay? She had that natural mom thing that you ladies have, that we men never get, okay? I still don't know, how you moms can figure out that the baby needs changing, needs to be fed, needs to sleep, or wants to watch replays of Louisville Cardinals, whatever it is, right? That you have that natural instincts little thing. But one of the things that I found when we were pregnant, particularly with Elijah, was how much time was wasted among the women of our lives trying to determine the gender of our baby. It's a game you ladies love. I had decided, since we had decided we wanted to know beforehand, that we would not know until we had the ultrasound. Call me crazy. So engaging in any conversation was a waste of my breath, okay? Not to my wife and all the women in our lives. They all had theories. I'm sure she could tell you a bunch of them, and I'm sure you ladies could tell a bunch. I'm sure you men can say, yeah, look, I'm going to tell you something my wife did, or something to tell you my mother-in-law told us to try. There is one I remember. Oh, I think if you're carrying up high, you're carrying low, is that one? I knew Evangel was a girl because it was a different pregnancy. I knew, right? I anticipated it was going to be a girl and was surprised when it was. Other than that, I don't have a clue. One of them I remember, and I'm going to get the details wrong. Something about you hold out your wrist, you put a rock on a string or something. You all know what I'm talking about? I could be wrong. It could be, I don't know, the Encyclopedia Britannica. I don't know. You put something on a string, you put it over. If it moves this way, it's like a boy. If it moves that way, it's a girl. I don't know. Ask her. She could tell you, right? And it came out, it's a boy. And we found out we're having a boy, right? Now, there's tons of those little things. Are any of them true? I don't think so, right? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the magnetism of a boy is different from the magnetism of a girl, whatever that means. I have no idea, okay? Maybe boys just, they like to be higher and girls like to be lower in the womb. I have no idea, right, or how you would prove any of that. I just don't know, okay? But we do them anyways, don't we? And my wife and I, we're not superstitious people. But when she got pregnant, she wanted to know from day one, what am I having? Oh, I got to plan. We got to come up with names. How am I going to decorate the room, right? I can't wait until I'm 6 months pregnant to find out. I got to know when I still got 8 months, right? You know, that sort of game. She's had to know. So she does all these little things. And I remember we were convinced we were having a boy. I mean, convinced. Everybody, you're having a boy, you're having a boy, you're having a boy. The mother's intuition, you're having a boy. My mother-in-law came in and says, Mandy, I think you're having a girl. Like that, my wife's convinced she's having a girl. Okay, you got 50 people over here, all moms, because dads couldn't care less about this goofy game. Then your mom comes over here, and you jump from one ship to the other. Why don't we just wait until, doctors tell us something? But what do I know? So we still do this stuff today. And what Jacob does is something like that. What he's doing is he's following a process known as maternal impression process. It was a common belief in ancient Near Eastern world that a vivid sight during conception or pregnancy will leave its mark on the offspring. I still don't know what that means, but I'm reading directly from the commentary, and they're never wrong. And so what Jacob does is he puts peeled branches in the watering troughs, because this is where they frequent, right? So they're going to see it, because you got to get water, it's the desert. And also this is where they mate. And so they're constantly going to see these peeled branches. And the theory goes that doing so will produce the spotted and speckled sheep. I don't understand how that works. I'm not in the ancient Near Eastern world, and I trust those who study this stuff. They know more than I do. Now, what we need to see is not that this works, but that despite Jacob's approach, as bizarre it may be to us, God still overcomes Laban's sabotage and Jacob's ignorance. God still overcomes that. It's a key point there. So, they're born, right? So in verse 40, what he does is he separated the lambs and set the faces of the flock toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them Laban's. What's interesting is he does precisely what Laban did. So those who come out Laban, who come out white, he will separate them from the sheep he gets to keep. And he keeps this process going. Now the language of the text implies this took years. This was a long process. So it's not something he did in a year. But over time, each mating season, he saw God blessing him. And so he kept this process going. And so in verse 41 and 42, he employs the maternal impression process with the same results. Verse 41, when the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock that they might breed among the sticks. I think what that is, and if my memory serves me right, I didn't put in my notes, that I think the theory is the strong sheep will breed this part of the year, the weaker sheep will breed at this other part of the year. So I think, again, I could be wrong. I think what he's doing is those who are going to breed at this time, he keeps them together. Those who are going to breed at this later time, he keeps them together. I think that's what he's doing to increase his chance of this working. Verse 42, but the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there, so the feebler would be Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So So he continues this process, and it works. Now, this language in verse 42 picks up on the language in chapter 28. Your offspring should be like dust of the earth, shall spread. I think this is Isaac. Abroad to the west, to the east, and north, and the south. You and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. And this is a fulfillment of that. And the language of the man increased greatly, you see throughout Genesis. Later in Exodus, it is said the Israelites increased greatly, the descendants of Jacob. And that's when Pharaoh comes and says, I don't like that. So that language of increasing greatly is the language of being fruitful and multiplying. It's a fulfillment of the original covenant with Adam, but the Abrahamic covenant. God is blessing him among the nations. He's not in the promised land. So what do we do with this? Okay, this is the question that has haunted me all week. What in the world do you do with spotted and speckled sheep and this weird strips of branch you put in the watering trough? What do we do with that? Okay, I've got 3 things, and we'll call it night. If you have something else, I'm open to suggestions. One is Jacob learns that blessings are a divine gift. One of the things we're getting in the story is the slow separation of Laban and Jacob. And so what this does is that Laban understands that his blessing is not tied to his ingenuity or hiring skills. It's tied to God's favor. Jacob is discovering that God's blessings are not the result of standard practice of shepherding. He makes a bizarre choice of choosing a rare breed of sheep, not even a breed. And through that, God still blesses him. And that shows him that blessings are first and foremost a gift from God that should be received as such. Not something that we are entitled to. Jacob is not a good person. Go back and read about Rachel and Leah and his kids. They're not good people. Yet they are the promised ones of God. So God chooses to bless Jacob. Now with that, foolishness can blind us to God's blessings. And Jacob has to be careful to think that he is so creative that he has manufactured this. I don't think that's what he's going to do. But he has to be careful with that. And Laban has to be careful with this, that even losing Jacob, he can't. So blessing comes from God, not necessary for human ingenuity. Now, God uses human ingenuity and wisdom for his blessing, but it ultimately comes from God. And the last thing is God keeps his promises even when it seems he has forsaken those promises. So God keeps his promises even when it seems he has forsaken those promises. So this story, as bizarre as it is, fits within a broader context. So if you just read it in isolation, it's weird. I don't think I added this late, so I didn't put it on the PowerPoint. Genesis 28:15. You remember in chapter 28, Jacob has the theophany. Remember the stairway to heaven, right? Which, by the way, when we looked at that, I listened to that song. I'm going to use it as an illustration. No one knows what that song is about, and let me just say something controversial. It is not a good song. So I probably just ruined your childhood. I just don't like. It's not my cup of tea. But I said that to someone like the next day, and they're like, "Never say that again." "Stairway to Heaven" is the greatest song of all time. Is it? Bohemian Rhapsody is. Anyway, so you remember the stairway to heaven. Well, you remember that Bethel is on the border of Canaan with where he's going to go. And that's why Jacob initially lays down. He grabs a rock. He falls asleep on it. And because he's tired. He's been walking all day. That is when he gets the dream of the stairway. It's a type of tower, probably a ziggurat sort of thing, leading up, whose head is in the heavens, what Tower of Babel is supposed to be. And so he sees the angels ascending and descending, and he has the theophany. Well, in that story, God says to Jacob, "Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go." Now, he's leaving the promised land to go find a wife. "And I will bring you back to this land For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. So that's the promise, is yes, he's going to be fruitful, multiply, and all the stuff to Abraham, yes. But the promise is land. He will take possession of the land. And so here Jacob, he goes to this foreign land to get wives, like his father did. Same place. Rebekah is Laban's sister, and now he's married Laban's daughters. That means they're related somehow. Anyway, so he works 14 years, and he thinks it's time for me to go home, because this is not my home. The promise is not here in the land of Laban. And what happens by the end of the story? He is stuck there. He's entered into an agreement that is keeping him away from that fulfilling that promise. His parents aren't getting any younger, and he is not supposed to be here, he's supposed to be there. The question is, will Jacob be patient enough and live with a sort of faith like his father had to learn, that whether it's 14 years or 25 years, like with Abraham, to have a baby, he will patiently wait, for God will fulfill that promise. And God does, I believe in the next chapter, chapter 31, God will start that process of fulfilling. It's when Jacob deceives Laban and all that. So I think that is a point of application here. Just because Jacob is signing on for a longer time outside of the promised land, that doesn't mean God isn't going to keep his promise. It just means that God isn't going to keep his promise yet. In Genesis, there's a recurring theme of the marriage of faith and patience. If to have one, you have to have the other. If you have faith with no patience, you have no faith. Because you're saying is, God, I believe you'll give me this, but I ain't going to wait for it. That's not faith, because it lacks patience. And patience brings with it faith. It says, I will wait because I believe. So Jacob, like his parents, has to learn that with faith will come patience. If God wants him in Laban's household, then he can wait patiently. The day will come when he will return to the promised land. So, if he has faith and patience, he does not need to question God's faithfulness to Jacob. And I think the spotted and speckled thing that it works out is one way of God assuring Jacob, I haven't abandoned you. I am going to bless you. And what you're seeing here, I will do there. But you're not down there yet. You're not ready for it. And one of the things he's doing is he is softening Esau's heart. And that comes up later. So while Jacob may think, I'm getting impatient, 14 years is a long time, God is at work in the background, even though Jacob doesn't see it. So we have to live by faith. And that faith has to be really patient. Really, really patient. One of the things I talk with legislators all the time, especially whenever they get frustrated. I talked to one today who was very frustrated. I actually talked to two from two very different parties. Both were frustrated for very different reasons. One was frustrated that the bill he really was passionate about got stalled. The other one is that none of these bills are getting stalled. So, I mean, you can't win in politics. I emailed one in particular. And I tell them all the time that this is one session. You are building a legacy that the day will come. What if in 50 years, you're long dead, 50 years, something you worked hard for, God blesses, but you never see it? Will you still work hard for it today? Of course you will. Then work hard for it. William Wilberforce, when he got converted, was ready to quit politics, British political leader. He was a member of Parliament. I was going to say congressman, but that's America. He's a member of Parliament. He wanted to quit politics because he got saved. He went to John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, who was his uncle or cousin or something. And Newton says, God has put you here. And so work for something that is God glorifying. And Wilberforce became passionate about abolishing slavery. Wilberforce was basically on his deathbed when he found out, finally, after decades of hard work, that God had honored his request. So if Jacob is faithful in simply raising sheep, God will honor that work and change the world. Don't underestimate if we're just faithful in these little things, God will honor that in the end. All right. How about we pray? All right, get you out just a little early. I'll pray for us. God, thank you.